Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Minding My Own Mind. This is Michelle. First solo episode for the year. I've been doing a lot of interviews lately, and I have been really excited to talk about this because I had this realization the other week where it was talking about holding your standards. And I've talked a lot about having boundaries and making sure you set the standard for how people treat you. And I wanted to talk about something that a lot of people have an issue with. I have certainly had this issue in my life, but I wanted to share my realization. And the thing is, a lot of us deal with inconsistent people, and we consistently call them inconsistent. We say so and so inconsistent. One day they're like this, one day they're like that, one day they're like this, one day they're like that. Then you have someone else who you're like, oh, I like this person because they're really consistent. And what I want to talk about is the inconsistent person. And although this came to my mind when I was thinking more about dating and more about dealing with people in romantic situations, this is actually something that applies to everyone, regardless of the relationship, whether it's platonic or romantic, is that people aren't actually inconsistent. People are very consistent. What they're doing is they're consistently showing you exactly what priority level you are to them. They're showing you exactly what they can offer to you, but you're calling them inconsistent because you want them to be something else. You want to place them in a different category than they are, than you're accepting that they're putting themselves in. And what I want to talk about is how to, one, accept this realization, and two, set your standards so that they can choose whether they're going to come into that or not. And for you to really swallow that pill of they are not inconsistent, it is me. And so I'm going to go a bit more detailed on how to actually set these boundaries because I realize a lot of people understand what boundaries are. I've educated you on them, but now we're going to go through some very clear, more practical ways of setting just the standard of your life. And so instead of only thinking of the word boundaries, I want you to start thinking of it also in the terms of it being a standard. This is the standard for someone getting my energy. If someone falls below this standard, they do not get my energy. This is my standard of my types of friends. If someone falls below this standard, we are not friends. No matter how much I want to make them my friend, I need to respect myself more and say, hey, they don't want to be put into that situation, or they want to be put into that situation at a standard that I am not willing to accept. So let's go more into that. So, how do you set standards in your life? Boundaries. Boundaries. If you haven't heard me talk about boundaries, I have so many things talking about boundaries. But one big thing when it comes to boundaries is you are setting the boundaries so that people can get closer to you, not to push them away. You're saying, hey, here is where you need to meet me at. And if you can't meet me here, I can't necessarily meet you where you are. And so in my last episode, I was talking about meeting people where they're at. By that, I also mean just accepting they are where they are, and you can choose whether you're going to communicate more or less to bring them to where you are, to show your standard in case there is a miscommunication. Your actions very much so speak louder than words. So if you are consistently saying, hey, that doesn't work for me, and then you do something opposite, it's not clear to them, and you are clearly not honoring yourself. And so it's very important to be consistent for your own sake and so that the other person can understand should you want to communicate and have a further relationship with them. The second part of getting standards and having standards in your life with the people that you're dealing with would be reactions to expectations. And so reinforcing your boundaries. So we will go through setting your boundaries, then we'll talk about reinforcing your boundaries. We will talk about the self-awareness you need to have to even understand when you are not setting the correct boundary or when a boundary needs to be put into place. And we will talk about how you can communicate it clearly. I think it's so crucial for people to understand this in order to bring some more mental peace to themselves. I feel like I'm quite self aware, but I still have to go back and think about these things. So, first, setting the boundaries, making sure that you are clearly knowing what you want. And even if you don't, something still should be said because you do know what's not working. So, you don't always have to know what is the exact thing that you want, but you can very clearly know what you don't want. I know I don't want people disrespecting me. There are certain things that are very clear to me as acts of disrespect. And then I wouldn't necessarily be able to give you a list of ways of these are ways of respecting me, but I can tell you what the heck is not respecting me. So making sure you know what doesn't work for you, and even better if you know exactly what works for you, because you need to clearly state what you are wanting after that person has interacted with you. And so an example of this might be having friends who don't reach out to you and you feel like it's one-way relationships. Okay, so you could say, hey, I would really like it if you planned the next time we went out. That's if you're wanting to communicate it. You could also just stop communicating and see what happens. I don't necessarily think that that's passive aggressive. I think not responding or ignoring someone is a bit passive aggressive, but choosing to just take a step back and see what happens, I wouldn't necessarily say that's passive aggressive. But when you start observing it, accept what you see. So if you take a step back from reaching out to some friends that you feel maybe it's a one-sided relationship, they're really present when they're there, but if you don't call them, they're never calling you. Take a step back and see, okay, what happens if I don't reach out so much? And then you will have your answer. They will either reach out to you or they won't. And then you can choose what you're going to do with that information. You can't necessarily be angry with them. What you need to do, from my point of view, is to take responsibility for how you are allowing them in your life. In this case, yeah, I would be upset. I've had it happen before. I'll be upset like, dang, I thought we were closer friends. Like, I thought we were cool. I thought they would want to keep talking to me. But I guess that wasn't it. Or maybe we were only weekend drinking friends, but we weren't actually really friends. So, okay, that's good to know. It doesn't even mean you have to cut off that person forever, but observe it. And as I always say, you choose what you allow. If you continue to allow relationships to exist in your life at a certain level, that's where they will be. If you want the relationships to improve, so say you would actually like to hang out with that person more, you could see if they could start planning. You could communicate like, hey, is there a particular reason? But you have to accept what the reality is when it comes up. So if they're like, oh, I just don't plan that much or whatever, accept that maybe you're just not as much of a priority in their life as they are in yours. And I think this is one of the hardest things to deal with, is when we want people to be a higher priority. We want to be a higher priority in their lives because we want to make them a higher priority in our lives, and we're doing that. And this is where that inconsistency will show up, or what we will think is inconsistency when it is consistent. They're consistently showing you, you are not so important that I'm going to do ABC. Like, if I see you, hey, we're cool, we're going to get along, but you're not important enough for me to call. You're not important enough for me to respond within a certain amount of time. You're not important enough for me to ABCDE. And you have to take that information and do what you want with it. I have people like this in my life currently. Well, they're not really in my life, but I would say I have to observe, okay, they are saying put me as a B level friend or a C level friend, then I need to stop making them an A level friend. I need to stop putting the same priority on them and meet them where they're at or leave them where they're at. When it comes to enforcing and reacting to your expectations not being met. So let's say you have someone in such a way and they are not meeting your standards. I realize this. A lot of people don't meet my standards to be my friend. A lot of people probably don't meet your standards to be your friend, yet you give them friend opportunities, friend privileges. I have learned to protect my peace, and therefore, not everyone gets friend privileges from me. I'm a very friendly person, but most of y'all are probably C-level friends because not everyone is going to get A-level priority, because it doesn't make sense if you are not pouring back into me in the same way I'm pouring into you. It doesn't always have to be 50-50, but if the overall outlook of the relationship, the friendship, isn't 50-50, then no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make sense to me to continue using my energy there when I have other people that are pouring back into me at a different rate that I want to pour into. And so be more cautious with your energy. This will change your life. You don't have to be rude to people. You don't have to be evil to people, but you don't have to give everyone all of you. You don't have to give everyone really any of you that is not required of you from the responsibilities that you have taken on in your life. This is a huge thing. So when someone is not meeting your standard, do I communicate it or do I not? That is up to you. As I said before, that is really up to you. So let's go a bit into reacting to when someone's not meeting your standards or reinforcing boundaries. So one thing that is going to make your life a lot easier if you feel like you consistently have a boundary problem, one, your actions probably don't align with the boundaries that you're setting. So you say, I don't let people do this, I don't let people do this, I don't let people do that, and then they continue to do it and you don't reinforce it. So that's why you're having issues there. Could be. It's not always the case. Of course, there's exceptions, but this is a generalization. It could be that. It could be that you're not communicating clearly when someone didn't even know you had the boundary, but you don't bother saying anything until you've boiled over and you're so upset that you blow up on them, although they've never known that you've had this boundary. So my tip in this area would be, this is pre someone not meeting your standard, is to know what standards you have for yourself and to also carry your standards and live by your own standards. For example, the way I carry myself reflects a lot in the way that I'm expecting people to treat me. And when people don't treat me in a certain way that aligns with that, I'm going to react in a certain way. So here's the thing with setting boundaries. You don't have to set the same boundaries with everyone. You don't have to set the same boundaries with everyone. You can have different boundaries for every person. Just expect that you're going to be communicating them a lot more often. However, you don't owe it to anyone to have the same boundaries as them. When looking at reinforcing your boundaries and reacting to people not meeting your standards, one, I would look at what are my actions, and are my actions aligning with the boundaries that I've set? I'm not saying that they have to perfectly, but communication is a lot more clear when you are honest with yourself, honest with your actions and your words align. And then from there, communicate. You choose if you're going to communicate, because you choose whether you are going to give that person an opportunity to meet your standard or not. Here's the thing. A lot of us, maybe, if we communicate it. So many people don't communicate it at all and hope to do the mind reading thing. Some people are so terrified of being disliked that they will never communicate it, or they wait until they boil over and explode on someone. So what you need to do is communicate it clearly, notice it, and verbalize the issue. Verbalize what the problem is, and verbalize the consequences so that the person can choose what they're going to do. But here's the biggest point. When you verbalize your consequences, you need to do something afterwards. So this is where the follow through comes in. If I say, hey, don't talk to me like that or I'm leaving, what should I do when they talk to me like that? I should leave. This is the hardest part for people. A lot of people will say, I would never, but when the time comes up, it's very difficult. Consistency is good because it can let people you haven't interacted with yet have a decent baseline of like how to deal with you. But you don't owe it to anyone to have the exact same boundary with them, to have the exact same standard with them as someone else. It just makes it a lot easier. For example, if I'm dating somebody they are not going to have the same standard as someone who I just met off the street. And the person on the street definitely, absolutely does not have the same standard or expectations or boundaries as the person I'm dating. Of course, there are things that overlap. I expect to be respected by both of them. I expected to be talked to in a certain way by both of them. But the things I will allow for one person doesn't have to match what I allow for another person. But the more consistent you are, the more people will know how to treat you before you even open your mouth. If you are carrying yourself with a level of self-respect, if you are carrying yourself with a level of self-respect and self-love, the world will, most of the time, act accordingly. Of course, I know that there are times that this doesn't happen, but I'm going to use a very good, great example of how your view of yourself really, really matches the way you allow people to treat you. So in this lovely, lovely book, Mastery of Love, I have mentioned it so many times, he talks about how you will never let someone else treat you worse than you would treat yourself. You will never let someone else treat you worse than you would treat yourself. So when someone is disrespecting you and you do nothing about it, and this does not mean fighting them. This does not mean like going off on them. This means just doing whatever you need to do, exiting the situation, no longer interacting with that person, fully limiting that person's access to you. If someone disrespects you and you do nothing about it, that's showing that you are okay with your value being at the level of someone who can be disrespected in that way. Another example was I had an ex and it was like the end of the relationship. And I've talked about this before. It was the end of the relationship. And there were so many things looking back. And I think we all have this where there's so many things looking back that just did not add up. When I look at it now, I'm like, why did I let that happen? Why did I let that happen? And then there was a time where he called me stupid. And I had not a single problem breaking up with him then. I had no lingering feelings. Like everything was done. It was so easy. I could never believe that it would be that easy. And I was like, wow, does this mean, when I read this part in this book, I was like, clearly my self-worth was not as high as I would have liked to think it was at that time. And so it doesn't mean I was walking around thinking I'm trash all the time, but something in my subconscious, which is why it's very important to do subconscious work, reprogramming, all these things. Something in my subconscious was like, dang, he's right. Or you deserve this treatment. Or yeah, you are worthy of this treatment. Because think about it. Think about your life right now. If there is something that you know absolutely is not true at all, that would never fly, it does not take you half a second to not tolerate that. You meet someone new and they're so off the wall and they say something ridiculous. You barely are even bothered by it because you're like, it's not even kind of close. But when it's starting to hit close and when we're starting to get into deeper things that our wounds are revealing, it can reflect back on how we set our boundaries. It reflects back on the standards we allow in our life. We allow crappy friends to get all of our energy and all our time, and we say nothing to them. We say something to them and decide to still keep hanging out with them because maybe we don't think we can make better friends, or for some reason we deserve that treatment that they're giving us. Whatever it may be, you need to go figure out your standards and then start enforcing them. And I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I can tell you the more you do this, and it takes time and it's not a one-time thing, the more you do this, one, the easier it is. And two, it's just so clear as to like, that's not my standard. None of my friends are allowed to do this to me. So why would I allow some random person now to do this to me? Makes no sense. And so set the boundaries and standards for what you expect from people for your life. What kind of people do you want in your life? Go set it, go write it. The more clear you are on this, the easier your whole life becomes. I'm telling you right now how to manifest a better network of friends. So take notes. Go write down, what is a friend to you? What is something friends absolutely do not do? And if anybody in your life is on that page, you can go tell them, or you can be like, look, why am I holding on to baggage? Why am I choosing to hold on to baggage that I don't need to hold on to? A lot of y'all got friends from childhood that ain't your friends. A lot of y'all got friends from childhood that ain't your friends. You're loyal to people that aren't loyal to you. There are plenty of people out there who are decent, who are good. You can go find them, but go write down the characteristics. You know why you're writing down the characteristics? Because it's a lot easier to recognize something when you've already acknowledged what the something is. It's kind of like, it's a lot easier to solve the problem when you know that there is a problem. Well, it's a lot easier to acquire the right people and the right friendships and the right relationships when you have decided what that means. What does that look like? Because I'm telling you, it aligns. It aligns, and it aligns fast as soon as you decide that's my standard. This doesn't work for me. They're not inconsistent. You just keep trying to put them in the wrong box. You keep trying to be a priority in their life when you're not. You're not. You're not a priority in their life. Maybe one day you will be. You know, like maybe you don't demand the authority to be a priority in their life yet, but you would shift. Think about it. Sometimes you meet someone new and maybe you're going to start dating, but maybe in the beginning, they're only getting part of my time. They're not getting all my time. They're not getting full Michelle attention immediately. It takes time to get that because they haven't met the standard of someone who's going to get full Michelle attention yet. So I think you have to be reasonable and realistic, but you have to decide, okay, this is how I operate. This works for me. This doesn't work for me, but I'm willing to discuss. And by discuss, I don't mean get rid of your standard completely. I mean clearly communicate, because maybe there is a miscommunication. Maybe there's a cultural difference. Maybe there's something else. This doesn't mean get rid of your standard, but it means that you're open to discussing something that maybe needed to be communicated. I can't tell you what needed to be communicated. I live abroad. I live in a different country. I've lived in many different countries. Cultures are different. People are different. It's worth communicating if I want to be friends with them. If they consistently show me they're not someone I want to be friends with, then I don't need to communicate with them other than bare minimum. And I'm not going to keep allowing them in my life in that way. Work on your self-awareness. Look at what you're doing. Look at how consistent you are. Look at the areas where you're not consistent. Who's a priority in your life? Who is getting the majority of your attention? Are you happy with the level of attention people are giving you or you are giving them? This does not mean go do crazy things for attention. This means go prioritize the people in your life, basically. Go choose that my good friends get more time than random people that can't text me. My good friends get time more than people that can't write me back within a reasonable amount of time. What is a reasonable amount of time? We all know what a reasonable amount of time is. If it takes you 2 weeks to write back to somebody, don't bother writing back. And so I have a lot more, but I just want you to realize that when you set that standard, so what I want you to do is work on your self-awareness, work on knowing what your standards are and recognizing what doesn't meet your standards. And let me tell you, when you grow your self-esteem, grow your self-worth, and know what you're looking for, you will become a magnet. I'm a walking magnet right now. You will become a magnet energetically, and you'll also realize you'll feel like a magnet because now that you know what you're looking for, it is so clear. The more clear you get on what you're looking for, you see it, it's there, it's so clear. It's almost funny because you're like, how could I not see so clearly before? Because I was still trying to please other people. Because I was still insecure in some kind of way. Because I wasn't valuing myself. Because I wanted to be liked, whatever it may be. As soon as you get past all that, I promise it's so fast. I want you to write me because I don't even think you realize how fast it's going to be. Write me a message on any of my social media about how fast it was as soon as you decided this is my standard and this is the only thing I'm looking for. If you're like, hey, I only want friends who can acknowledge me. I only want friends who also walk up to me. I only want friends that do ABCD. I only want friends right now in my life that are going to be my A-level friends. They must hit ABCD requirement. Oh, what's the point in having a list? This is bare minimum standards. I'm sorry. No, I don't need to normally write down not being disrespected. But hey, if I still have a ton of people disrespecting me on a regular basis and I'm dealing with it, maybe I do need to write that down. Maybe I don't want people calling me out of my name. Maybe I don't want all these things. The things that don't happen that often, you're not going to need to write down because those standards have already been set in your head. It's the ones that you keep letting people get away with. It's the ones that those inconsistent people are getting away with, and you're wondering why they're inconsistent. Here's a way to figure out your standards. Go look at that inconsistent person and tell me what they're doing inconsistently. They don't write me back. They don't want to write you back. So look at those inconsistent people, and you can find your standard. How do I do that? What is the thing they're doing that you think is inconsistent? They not writing you. They not calling you. They not inviting you out. Not coming up and saying hey to you when you see each other in public. You're always having to initiate everything. All of that. Look at your friends who you do like. Do they do all of these things? Well, it looks like you found a standard. As you know this standard more clearly, everyone will notice it. Because you will walk differently. You will perceive things differently. The way you tolerate things, the way you give people your time, all of these things are automatically going to change because you don't have a reason to tolerate anything else. Because you've worked on your self-worth, you've worked on your self-awareness. You know whether you're being consistent on your own end of showing what your standard is. If I look, times that people have been inconsistent with me and kept getting away with it was because of me. It's because I kept letting them, because I kept giving them space that they shouldn't have been getting, and I was the one who had to change. If they didn't want to come meet me in that space, then I need to change and not allow them to have so much space. What will happen is, and it's not always this, but from what I've seen, is pretty close. The way you value yourself will start to match the way people treat you. The way you value it, when you have a high worth for yourself and a high value for yourself and a high respect for yourself, other people will match it. And when you don't tolerate the people who don't match it, they figure it out immediately because you didn't tolerate it immediately. The problem is when you are also allowing them to get away with things. Just to recap, when you don't expect that people will treat you in a good way, you will be significantly more willing to accept trash or things that don't meet your expectations or standards. Why? Because you don't believe you're worthy of them. So go work on your self-worth. What does it all mean? Do the self-work, heal, do what you need to grow. Your confidence, your self-esteem, your ability to speak up for yourself. Start with small things so the big things become easier. You got to practice. It won't happen overnight. Well, it could happen overnight. Know what your expectations are of how you want people to treat you and respect you, and respect yourself enough to enforce them. Respect yourself enough to enforce them. Exist as the person who is worthy of all of that respect. Exist as the person who deserves to be respected, who people already know before they talk to me. You don't mess with Michelle like that. You don't do these things to her. Why? Because she doesn't tolerate that. And when someone doesn't meet that, they don't get that space in your life. Communicate your boundaries clearly. Reinforce them very clearly and give the consequence. Be confident and okay with being disliked. Be confident and okay with being disliked. Love yourself enough to be disliked. Love yourself enough to be disliked. I'm going to wrap this up and tell you the people who have the most issues with you setting your boundaries, because this is a huge thing. People are terrified of being disliked. But let me tell you who has an issue with you setting boundaries. People who can't meet your standards. People who don't want to meet your standards. People who have their own don't have their own standards. People who don't set their own boundaries. And people who are trying to manipulate you. The key today is to love yourself, take responsibility. They're not inconsistent. You're just not a priority. Go figure out what you want to do with that information. Thanks for listening. I love you and I love me and you love you too. Have a wonderful week and let's talk soon.